Oh, you're very well behaved. This is great. Didn't have to say anything. I'll leave the door open for a little bit longer because there might be a couple of stragglers. RMIT is notorious for finding rooms, things like that. We'll start with the acknowledgement. RMIT University acknowledges the people of the Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nations, whose unceded lands we conduct the business of the university. RMIT University respectfully acknowledges their ancestors and elders past and present. RMIT also acknowledges the traditional custodians and their ancestors of the lands and waters across Australia where we conduct our business. We've got a couple of panellists here today. I'm going to do some other housekeeping. We're streaming today, so if you don't want to end up on the internet, don't look into the camera, but you'll be okay sitting up there, but you will be recorded. There are microphones around the rooms, and the microphones only work when you press the button. So there's a little button in front of it, and you'll need to lead into it so people at home or wherever they're watching can hear you. But I'll try and repeat the question so our panellists can answer them directly. So we have a question for today for our panellists, so they're not completely unprepared. And this relates to the vet industry, of course, because we're the vocational education design team. We run these panel sessions. My name's Jack Dunstan. I probably should have started with that, but anyway. The vet industry is perpetually being reshaped by industry forces, funding agreements and government initiatives. It's also worth noting that international forces and policies and trade can affect how training is conducted and how training responds to industry and international needs. So today's panel session is directed to share some of the solutions across the learning environments and to help all of us sort of deliver stronger learning experiences and more sustainable ones as well. So we invited the current panellists because they're leaders in the field, they're experts, and they can share some of their insights with us and improve the vet industry as a whole. So the question is, how can we achieve practical and sustainable technology solutions in vet, industry and skills training? And our first speaker is Lindsay Rattray. Is it Rattray or? Rattray. Rattray, great. I'll give you the buzzer. Thank you.
Thanks. Just make sure it's working. All right, it's all good. Okay, so something maybe a little bit out of character for me. Well, actually, firstly, I should introduce myself. I'm Lindsay Rattray. I work at Navitas. I'm the Associate Director of Learning Systems, Technologies and Innovation. It's a rather long title that is really focused on learning systems, but also improving learning systems. So a key part of my job is around technology sustainability, making good choices that will work for us in the future as well as just now. So what's a little bit out of character for me though is I'm going to focus really on the technology in this little presentation. There's a whole other piece of work that we obviously need to do around bringing people along. I will touch on training a little bit, but I think for the purpose of this, it's kind of a technical questions that someone from a non-technical background should be asking about technical decisions or about decisions around technology. Ooh. Okay, well, I do a little bit of DJing in my part-time, so I'm kind of going to run this theme through it. The first kind of area that I think that we need to look at when we make our technology decisions in education is around the selection. So which tools do we choose and how do we choose them? And here are a few features that I think are important in that choice. One of them is it open source? Does it use open standards? Does it have an open API? In other words, can it communicate with other pieces of technology easily? So for example, in your learning management system, when you choose a plugin, you want other developers, for example, to be able to extend that plugin or to be able to change it or to be able to improve it. If it's using open standards or an open API, in other words, something that is freely available on the internet that you can look up and say, for example, Canvas. I can look up the API in Canvas and I can say, this is the features of it, this is how it works. Then then you have some confidence that it can be reused, or it can be improved, or that it will last. Another related one is it well maintained? So this is something that we definitely look at. When we're looking at a new plugin, we use Moodle, not Canvas. We just have a look at the register of changes and say, well, this one was last updated 5 years ago, maybe not such a good choice. This one has been updated a lot, and you can see the history. It's quite easy to see. Therefore, clearly it's still being invested in. Is it commonly used? And this is something that you will just have an aware of naturally anyway, just by being in the industry, but it's something that you can ask a question about. So for example, H5P as a learning interactive tool. You know that you will have heard this about, you will see other institutes using it, so you know that it's likely to survive into the future. And a couple of other comments on standards, use of other standards. So data standards, the IMS consortium have a long list of data standards that you can look at in relation to different kinds of learner data. We use the XAPI standard, for example, in our central PD work at Navitas to track learner activity. So it means that instead of just in the learning management system, we can look across multiple different systems and say, how are our staff, because this is PD we're talking about, using all of these different systems, how are they engaging with all of the learning that happens across those systems in different ways, rather than being just confined to these different silos of our Moodle data and, for example, our Zoom data. Other kinds of standards are standards that you might want to even write yourself. So for example, Quality Matters, TLAS, which is an SQLite group, or at VU we had our own ones which are freely available. You can find them on the internet. Griffith have some as well. These are minimum online standards. You know, we could group them in that way. And they're about use of the technology, but also design standards. What kind of features do you expect to see in a good course, for example? And then if you build your processes around that set of minimum online standards, so you've got a course improvement process or a course review process, then when you change those standards, you can, if you've got it all set up right and you're managing it carefully, you can expect that the online standards will then cascade into the courses. For example, you decide, well, our welcome videos need to say X, Y, Z things. They've been a little bit haphazard in the past. Change the standards. That will flow into the courses. A relatable thing that, from my point of view at Navitas, I think that we could do a lot better is to what extent are your learning objects shareable, savable? Can you collaborate on them across different staff? We use H5P, and I think from our staff's perspective, I don't think they really understand, when I save my H5P, where does it save? Is it a member of a course? Is it connected to me? How do I share it with a staff member? How do I send it to someone? If I save it, is it on my hard drive or is it in the cloud? That we've got some work to do there, I think, because I know that at VU the system was a lot clearer, and you could go into an H5P object and you could go share Lindsay Rattray, and then you would know that it's been shared. And another point around learning objects is they need to be editable ongoing. It's pretty common that we invest in something like, for example, Articulate. We make these beautiful looking, well, arguably beautiful looking learning modules. The person who has the expertise in Articulate or even the license for Articulate disappears, could even be a contractor, and then you've got this module that you're stuck with. It's kind of it's like a block, and you either have it or you don't have it. So that's in the kind of technology selection area. The next is setup. One question that we ask is it scalable? What if everyone wants one? We particularly think about that when we're doing a trial. It's quite apart from the question of how do we get everyone to want one. That's the people side. But you need to be ready so that you can potentially scale this technology across all your staff. And it might be as simple as talking to your IT department and saying, okay, we're running this now in this college, or in our case, in this other school. What happens if they want it? Are they on the same setup as us? How easily could we spread it? Could we share it with them, spread it to them? Is it upgradable? So it's not just, before I was talking about, is the vendor upgrading it? Are they actively improving it? But what happens if they upgrade their version, and then you want to actually follow suit? How easily doable is that? Is the IT department, or are you going to say, well, we're in the middle of term, and in actual fact, most of us are always in the middle of some kind of term. We can't possibly stop term, so we've only got one opportunity maybe at Christmas time to upgrade things. You don't necessarily have to go, what's the infrastructure setup? What are the UAT servers and all of this? But a high-level question of, is it upgradable? How do we upgrade it? Is a way into that conversation, either with your IT department or whoever it might be. Is it backed up? Is another key question, and it worries me across the sector, and it's not just where I've worked, but also other people that I've kind of spoke to about this topic. What our backup processes are, and whether or not we're even meeting our compliance requirements. And you might get quite vague answers if you ask that question. My suggestion would be probe further. Say, well, okay, that's up to the vendor. For example, you might have an LMS vendor that's managing all that, or even hosting for you. But get an answer from them. What are their actual backup processes? How frequently? What happens if you actually contact them and say, we had someone delete something, or it was an accident, or there was an error? What happens then? What backups can you get us, and how quickly? And similarly, is it restorable? Who can do that restore? What levels do staff need to go through in order to do that restore? Maybe if they made a mistake, or in some cases, if they discovered someone actually deleted something deliberately. Another one, right down at the user level, is it undoable? That's a basic just feature of user experience design or user interface design that you should be able to undo your action. So even think about in your learning management system, if you delete something, can you just press an undo button? I'm not talking about going to the vendor. Can you just undo it? Yeah. Okay, so moving on to maintenance. I chose this tape player because I kind of thought to myself, well, how many tape players do we have out there in our ecosystem of different tools that we're using? And I'll come back to that in a sec. Maintenance for me is about alignment of processes, so that the processes around your technology systems and the actual people who use them. So if you're doing things like upgrades and migrations, sure, there's a technical element to those jobs which needs to be done right. But what about the training side of things? That's a really good opportunity. Say, for example, you're getting a whole lot of new features and you're about to get a new look and feel. Then you need to have a good heads up to train your staff in how to use those new features, why the new look and feel is it's not necessarily removing all of these features that are suddenly in different places or look different, and how to use it. And the same is true, if you're doing your data migration, or if you're just changing to a different system, whatever it might be. Any of these kind of activities, you need a good lead time, and you need to do all the training. Otherwise, I think what you start to do is you get this kind of gap that becomes bigger and bigger between the technology and between the users. And let's say, for example, I know you've just installed Canvas recently. There's a real attempt and investment to bring those two into line through PD and all of the other work that I know that RMIT's been doing. But over time, that gap can become bigger. If there's new features, people don't know about them. There's a new look and feel, people don't understand it. I think I touched on professional development. Yeah, but then I just maybe a kind of almost final thought is just how many little tape players do we have around there, around our ecosystem? How many times do you see someone, or maybe yourself, go to use something and think, I don't know exactly how to use it, I'll avoid it. Or I don't know exactly, like I understand this path for using something, and so I know that this sequence of clicks gets me there, but I don't really understand, all the steps around that. So if something goes wrong in that process, I either don't have time to follow it up, or I have to go all the way back, and it takes me too long. For me, there are examples of these little tape players that can start to get there, get into our systems, and I think this focus on sustainability can actually address them. Just in summary, I don't think that we can get all of the qualities that I described in every tool. That's probably a dream world, but it's about thinking about what features does your choice have, your choice of technology have, and then if it doesn't have particular features, for example, it's not open, it doesn't share open standards. Is that a problem? Are you going to upgrade in the future? Are you going to think about changing things in the future? What's the plan there? And yes, it's mitigate for the limitations, basically. That's it from me.
Thank you, Lindsay. I like seeing the picture of the tape player because it's the old, faithful, reliable thing that works, but meeting the student needs and working within the ecosystem that you have is quite difficult. We're always trying to pick the right technology for the learning environment. Despite the size of the industry, those things don't exist, and we've had to sometimes build our own in our team, which can be a challenge, but it's also really, really rewarding when you know that the things that you need to do aren't just available on the shelf. So coming up now is Rita. I've got Rita's deeds here, just a moment. So Rita is the Assessment Innovations Manager at Pearson. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. So I'm the Assessment Innovations Manager because I'm passionate about assessments because they're awesome. So what do I do? Well, I manage digital development and production for our partners on a range of different learning management platforms, Moodle, Canvas, Blackboard, and there are other LMSs out there as well. So I have the joy of working across multiple learning management systems, and joy it is. And I design, develop, and work with SMEs and technologists around different assessment methodologies. And you might think, so what's so important about assessments? Why assessments? Well, I go and look at the different technologies out there. Some of it is old school, like QR codes. Some of it is sort of like really new about 3D printing. So how do you go about writing assessments for these technologies? We are supposed to be, forefront, we're, thought leaders. So how do we embed these assessments into a course? It actually starts with curriculum design. It starts with when you're setting up a whole course and thinking about, where am I going to integrate workplace technology? Do I have the funding to do this? Probably not. But that's okay, because that's where industry partners come through. My job is to sort of push that thinking, and not necessarily the technology up front, but to start people thinking about templates. And I think once the first idea gets hold of, and you go, we can use 3D printings this way, and we can use drones this way, it sort of naturally falls into place. So what I usually do with our partners is I go, in the real world, this is how QR codes are being used. I go to a market in China, in Beijing, and go shopping for groceries. I don't use cash. They don't accept cash. And they don't accept credit cards. I have to pay everything using my phone. I have cash that I can't use. It's really quite frustrating. And my daughter wants to buy a toy, all the vending machines are using WeChat and things like that. And people look at... I actually got refused to get for a taxi because I could only pay in cash, and they go, no, I only accept WeChat payment. So, it's actually quite advanced now. So I take this and say to, lecturers and say, you're teaching international business and studies. This is a technology that is used widespread. So how do you assess it? And then we sort of generate a whole lot of assessment ideas. The results could be process management, marketing campaigns, system integration, and a whole lot of policies. Some of it is just like, submitting a report. But others could be like using technology, and how do you embed that technology into a system where you can sort of assess and say, yeah, you understand this concept and you can apply it. Go forth and replicate QR codes. So before I move on, who has forced a learning management system to do something they're not supposed to do? Yay! I've done it multiple times, and I go, I want QR codes and I want drones in the LMS and I want it all integrated. And then I take it to my team, I take it to the platforms people, I take it to LMS managers. Automated response is no. So I've actually bought a button for them so they can just press no. They don't have to say it anymore. I was sort of going, well, you can't keep on telling me no. There has to be a point in time where you're going to have to tell me yes. Yes, you can do this. With the solutions architecture, we did happen upon something called an exostructure. So what this means is, if you work in the VE space, you've got apprentices, you've got industry experts. Hands up those of you who have tried to get an industry expert or an apprentice or an employer to get a full scope of a student's profile, including finance, including getting them to log in, like employers checking in. Hands up, yeah, a couple there. Was it an easy task? No, it wasn't. It was really, really, really hard. And you've got your enterprise service business software that says, unless you're a student or a teacher, we will not enrol you in any of our systems. And then we're like, but no, the employers need to check off and they need to see the finances so they can pay. I get a no from them. And so through an exostructure, okay, fine, you can keep your enterprise systems. We'll just grab some data. There will be checks and balances there. They won't be able to access everything. You don't need to change anything. And through an exostructure, you can then link through industry experts, employers. You have your authentication systems there. LMS can also be attached to an exostructure. So you're no longer forcing a learning management system to do something that they're not supposed to do. But you have an environment which connects a lot of the data and the people required within a learning ecosystem to do the talking. And there's also vendors like us with Pearson. We've got textbooks and assessment products that we can help you with. And there's like virtual reality rooms or gaming engines that you might have, which do not necessarily talk well with a learning management system. So you've got all these really cool, innovative ideas, but it's just not talking. And sometimes it's just as easy as sending through, for virtual reality, it's just data that the student has done it, and these are the results and these are the points. You don't actually need the virtual reality room to be plugged directly in. The learning management systems are doing a fantastic job trying to catch up. Moodle now has the 360 rooms included, the virtual reality stuff, but they still lag behind. But, that's not their job, really. We're just forcing a system to do something that they're not supposed to do. So in terms of sustainability, in terms of moving forward in innovation, I think having an exostructure there to push the relationships, the systems to talk, instead of forcing systems to do things they're not supposed to, and have that ability to fail quickly, I think is quite important as well. So even if you fail in an instance within an exostructure, you're not impacting on the other systems. The enterprise systems, they're safe. They're sort of removed. Your LMS is safe, but you still have that room to explore and to innovate. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. We get heard no a lot in our team, so we can identify with that. But it's really, really helpful because you have to make a case and you have to justify it, and whether it's a business case or convince them that you might be right. And quite often they're not that they come round because you can be quite compelling and relate it back to student outcomes. David's next from Box Hill Institute, and he will be no stranger to many of you here who were previously there.
I feel I'm about to be poached. Hi everyone, great to be here, and thanks for the invitation to share some ideas. Okay, I've got to press a button somewhere. Oh, there we go. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a learning designer at Box Hill Institute Group. My background is in teaching. I started out as a music teacher, teaching classical guitar. I later went into ICT, and that's when I moved over to New Zealand. You can hear from my funny accent that I'm not from here. I'm from South Africa, and I also have some background in ESL teaching. My work is really in learning design, course research and development. I'm also coordinating masterclasses, which is a separate project at Box Hill. I'm also a PhD candidate, so I've been very much in an interesting research space for the last 6 or 7 years, about to finish this year. And it's really been an amazing journey. My research project is developing software for evaluating the quality of e-learning. So I think today's forum is a good place to talk about some of the ideas that I've been investigating. One of the things I've always kept in my mind as a teacher, and specifically a music teacher, is that there has to be a connection between the teacher and the learner. Now, we're in an interesting role, and I'm just, as I look around, I'm just awestruck because I know every learning designer is an expert, a multidisciplinary expert. And I've seen teams get together, and within a short time, this amazing capacity to connect and create new things comes out. And that's what keeps me passionate about learning design, is that we can almost be given a blank slate, and as the skills, interests, talents, and multidisciplinary ideas come out, something new can be born, something new can be formed. And learning design should always have that core of life for the learner, because it's about the learner. I'd like to refer quickly to an article published by Benjamin Bloom in 1984, and he kind of issued a challenge to teachers, which also holds over for learning designers. And he said, and you can look up his article, his main question was, how can we achieve the same results that we achieve with one-on-one tutoring with mass education? Now, that was in 1984, before the internet era. But I think that question is a very good one for us to ponder today. How can we ensure that what we are designing is as close to possible as a personal connection and relationship with a student in a tutoring situation? And that is our quest. Sometimes I think, if you remember the scene from Forrest Gump, where he runs out of the stadium and keeps running for a long, long time, basically it represents someone who's in the game, lots of interaction happening, but suddenly someone gets the ball and runs 100 kilometers from the rest of the team. And sometimes learning design can be like that. What I'm putting to you today is for us to reconsider why we do learning design. Learning design has a purpose. We use technology to serve that purpose, but sometimes we forget what that purpose is. If we look at the world of work today, the workforce, what is the currency of that workforce? What gets us into the workforce and keeps us in the workforce sustainably? The research base shows that expertise is that currency, expertise. Is expertise the same as competency? Are we training people to carry out procedures, or are we teaching them to think like experts? Are we designing facets into our learning programs that help people to think like experts? There's a famous article, I have it with me today if anyone's interested. It's from 1995 by, I believe it was Alan Lesgold. And it was an early simulation it was a project of teaching electronics engineers who worked in aeronautics environments. And in about 28 hours, they were able to take these apprentices who had about 2 years of experience to a 10-year level of expertise. When I read that article first, it worried me because I thought, if expertise is what makes people function successfully in the workforce, and it's possible to take a group of fairly unskilled and unfamiliar apprentices who are unfamiliar with their domain and train them to function as experts with 10 years of experience, all in under 30 hours, the question is, what are we doing wrong in our learning design? It was a provocation for me to start looking for ways of evaluating learning design, and that's what led me to my research project. Asking the question, is what we are teaching having that resulting effect on the learner? Are they becoming experts? Are they gaining higher levels of expertise because of the interaction with the programs that we design? I think this lies at the core of sustainability. If we are training people to solve more and more complex and sophisticated problems, if our learning design provokes them to think beyond competency to expertise, I think there'll be an automatic effect of sustainability for technology. We can't avoid technology. One of the projects we have at Box Hill is called Soldermatic, and it's a welding system. This welding system cuts out about 70% of the training time of traditional welding teaching. It's just one example of an augmented reality system that we use. But what it shows is that technology can take us much, much closer to that personal tutoring situation. And as we start putting emerging technologies like virtual reality and augmented reality into our systems with the purpose of creating experts with higher and higher levels of expertise, I think we've automatically built in a facet of sustainability that will never go away. As people can see the value, people know that they need to walk out of our courses and into jobs. If they can walk out in a seamless way and start work without having the workplace say, where did you come from? You don't know half of what we need to know, or half of what your qualification says you should know. We can close that gap with technology, and that is a key way that we can make technology sustainable. Before I finish, I'd like to do something that I would normally do in a music class. You can take the music teacher out of the classroom, but you can't take the classroom out of the music teacher. Let's just say this is group A and this is group B. I want us to do some nonverbal communication. This is the message we want to communicate. Let's have this group do the first part. Just the first part. Just the first two, and that is your response. Let's try it again. 1, 2. So we had perfect communication. Sometimes our communication can be nonverbal. And let's think of that as well. To finish off, let's just try this one. I would like Group A, by the way, fantastic, very musical people, okay? Great. Let's try, I'd like you to sing a note. Mm. And this one. Mm. Let's go together. Choir. Let's try it one more time and just raise that volume. I'd like you to close your eyes and hold that note for as long as you can. Well done. Let's keep that connection with our students alive.
Thank you very much, David. That was lovely, beautiful, great voices. It's probably no surprise that so many people with music background end up in learning design. And I think our former employer, Glenn Blair, is an example of that. Gordon as well. Very interesting. I did think the example of turning 10 years of experience and turning that into, could be learnt in 30 hours, was that correct? You know, this reminded me of The Matrix when Neo learns Kung Fu like that. And I think if that's an embodiment of learning design, there's a goal for the learning designers to work towards. People just put it straight in. You've all been very receptive and very generous to come here today, and hi everyone at home or at your desks. But you can now ask some questions and pick the brains of the people who are here today. As I said before, most of you should have a microphone. There's a button on it. If you could press it and lean in so everyone can be heard. Would anyone like to start? I won't drop a pin. What I'd like to ask is, I suppose, plugin selection. We're quite often having to choose the right technology for a learning environment, and often if you've already built the thing and you've made the wrong choice, how do you retrofit, or do you have a process for that as well?
You mean is that working?
Yep, just lean in. Yep.
You mean you've built what? What have you built?
You've built a learning experience, you've used one technology, you realise towards the end, maybe you haven't done the research, maybe the landscape's changed, maybe it's taken so long to get to delivery that it's no longer deliverable in its current form. Is it good to have a workflow for a plan B, or do you reconsider rebuilding?
Yes, but I would say I would look back to the start and say, if you've built everything, wholly, completely, in a way, that's all dependent on, the plugins dependent on the learning model and the assessments and, everything that David's talked about as well, with the learning design. If you got to that stage when you realise that, it doesn't work or the landscape's changed, then I would say there's something about the processes there that are very like the kind of a waterfall model of design, where basically each stage is a long way away from ever getting in front of students or actual teachers who are meant to use these tools, and that's what I would look at addressing. That how do you get teachers using? Well, let's just take a plugin as a simple example. How do you get the teachers using the plugin as quickly as possible? Obviously, in a non-risky way. If it's an assessment-related plugin, then maybe they can use it in a formative assessment, just in their own class. And maybe you start with teachers that have more of an interest. They're more, expert teachers or super user teachers or whatever you want to call them, whatever group your college might decide to form. That's where I would focus. I think there is a whole other thing about trying to kind of unscramble the egg, but in the end, you've really got to go back to to what got you there in the first place. So yeah, that's my take.
Has anyone had to retrofit a project to make it work? Yeah, it's a challenge. Any other questions from the floor? Yeah, Tom.
Okay. Tom Cotton from the College of SEH. I have a question to all of the panellists about understanding teaching workflows. How critical is that to the success of the student experience from each of your presentations' perspectives?
Hello, is it working? So when we were embarking on the exostructure project, that was working in a dual sector university, it was actually the teachers who drove the need. It was the administrators who drove the need, and they co-designed the solution. So without them and their insight, we would never reach a solution like that, because they could see the impact not only from the students, but also from the employer, and the employers were getting disengaged. So they were there every step of the way co-designing, and then we would have wireframes, would have working prototypes, they would test, and would test them at multiple levels, and they would reject some of our suggestions. We also had compliance in their testing alongside it, and there were some features within what we developed in terms of a dashboard for apprentices, which the teacher was saying, no, this is going to be too hard for employers, but it was an essential step to have in there because we need to meet compliance at a certain point, but we sort of could design it so that it wasn't the first thing that they see. So we still took into account that in the process of co-designing. So every step of the way, it's involving, if it's within VE, sometimes getting the employers on board, and the apprentices and the teachers will know which employers that they can tap on to say, oh, can you just, test this out? It'll make your life easier. So co-design and user input early on, rapid prototyping.
It's a really, really good question, and it's a really interesting topic, I think, trying to understand the teacher workflow outside class, inside class as well. A couple of thoughts. I'm running a session at 12, an online session through TelAdvisors, and two of it's kind of like, we've called it EdTech Shark Tank, and it's really just an opportunity for two early stage startups to present and to get some feedback. One of them is a chat app for basically getting help, and the other one is a classroom response system, so a classroom polling system. That's a really interesting one, I think, in terms of trying to model what happens in a classroom. The ask a concept checking question, get some feedback, share that feedback back with the students. That when you get down to that really granular level of what happens in a classroom, you get down to each individual teacher's kinds of practice, and how do you say, well, you guys all do it this way. You don't like to share the responses from the concept checking question immediately, but you guys all do like to share it immediately. So we have to make a design decision now about essentially what this app does by default, and then potentially lock people into other people's practice. I just think that's a really interesting philosophical question and design question. In terms of what we do, like at Navitas, I would say that we don't do near enough. I think that's what I was saying, that we need to be connecting with our teacher. I don't like to say users, but the users of the, for example, app, whatever it is, much more closely. A good example of this, or actually not a good example of this, is I remember Echo 360 Active Learning Platform. I think they've done some really great work in adding to what their product does in terms of it can do polling, and students can say that they're confused or give feedback, ask questions later. But then when I probed further about, okay, so if a teacher is going to use this, they've got to create something in PowerPoint, then they have to upload it. And then if they want to change it, they've got to go back to PowerPoint, upload it again, and they might lose all of the changes that they've made in Echo 360. And it was a really good example, I think, of where that gets missed. And I think if they involved teachers earlier, then they would have learnt that earlier and hopefully not had that problem. But it's a massive issue across the industry.
Yeah, I'd agree with Rita and Lindsay on that, in that collaboration is really important on the design to get that teacher workflow outside or in the classroom, because basically if we create something in a vacuum, we're just really resorting to that old off-the-shelf model. We may as well just pass them a textbook and say, learn it and do the exam. But once you get into the subtleties of working with the teacher who is, in our sector, the subject matter expert, they bring in those subtle nuances of how people understand the order of progress and in doing certain tasks. While we might just see a really neat progression along a certain path, there may be incredibly good reasons that a subject matter expert would want to start in a certain place and continue to another place. So I think that close connection at all levels and that collaboration and really asking the question, not only how do you teach it, but how does someone learn the subject? How does someone become, referring back to my earlier talk about how does someone become an expert? Not just how does someone learn this chunk of knowledge to pass an exam that we can tick off and say, yes, we've done the right thing. But how can they become, reach higher levels of expertise through this encounter? And I think it comes down to that collaboration, but also asking those kind of deeper questions about the process.
Just a related point is about student workflows. And I mentioned before, online standards or whatever you want to call them, design standards for the courses in your learning management system. So for example, when we were spreading these at VU or starting to build these into our design process, some of the feedback that we got from teachers was about, I don't want to order my course this way, or I don't want that information there. That they felt, in other words, a little bit like they were being controlled by these online standards. But then the question is, well, what's the student's workflow on the other hand? If they're working across multiple different courses and they're all displayed in different ways, what's the cognitive load on them trying to work out, for example, whether or not they've done everything for that week, or where the assessments are, or what the information is in the welcome video? So I think another related question to the one you're talking about is the student workflow.
A follow-up question for David was, in your evaluation, do you look at the level of learning administration inside your evaluation process?
When you say learning administration, are you talking about the teacher's job of it?
Yep.
So whenever a student isn't engaged in the learning process, they're navigating through an LMS, whether they are uploading or producing a video for an assessment, that's learning administration, rather than the actual process of engaging with the materials, with the topic, with the subject, developing that expertise. Do you evaluate that as well?
That is a great question. I think that is an area, to an extent, I'd say to an extent, but probably not enough. We've got a system that we're developing. We use a system called Student Web, which is based on Moodle, and we've basically reconfigured it for our own purposes. But one of the new developments is a module that enables learners to navigate their way in a much better way. This project that we've got is a brainchild of Julianne Seaman. I don't know if you know Julianne, but she's been working on this project for a few years, and it basically puts something into the learning management system that makes a whole lot of the interactions much more visible to teachers, administrators, and users. And part of that is the ease of navigation and always having that progress fed back to the learner where they are. So I'd say that it's a problem that's been identified, and I have heard it spoken about in quite a few contexts. We are dealing with it in one way that, in about a year, I'll be able to tell you if it's effective or not. But I think that's a great question, because the capability of the learner to administer their own learning is something that is often not a focus of teaching. We put them through a quick how to use Moodle or how to use Canvas or whatever it is, and then expect them to fly through it. But actually, and Lindsay's point about cognitive load, which is something that came up was the basis of my research as well. If we're putting learners who are not capable through a process of administration, which is just basically going to overload them and let them cut out of work, we're then introducing another problem for them. So very important problem, important question.
Oh, just like to...
Rita, you look like you're on
Yeah,
the
I
buzzer.
did. I was like... So at Pearson, we did like global research on what we call time on task. So how long a student takes to do certain tasks. So when we're doing a learning design document, we look at the activities and then say, okay, for discussion topics based on our research, we know that students will take this amount of time to do it. So it sort of, we take into account when we're designing, not only the content, cognitive load, how things are, but each activity in itself has a time required to complete that task, and we make sure that it isn't going to overload a student. So I've met some very enthusiastic SMEs and they want, 20 videos because that's really good. And then we sort of calculate all the tasks and all the discussions and all the journal articles that they do, and then say, well, if a student was to go through this based on our research and the time on task per activity, it's actually going to take them 30 hours a week to complete this particular module. So maybe not the best approach. How about, have you thought? And then that's when the conversations start. So there is research out there that says, it sort of answers your question, but not really. But there is research to say a student will take this amount of time based on this particular task and interactivity.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I'll just comment on that as well. I think in my experience, teachers generally do not put enough time into the focus of how long an activity should last, and they do not make that clear and explicit to students. And I think there's a big problem in a lot of courses where materials tend to develop over time, but they're never actually filtered out. So you just keep adding and adding and adding, and now all of a sudden, the coursework should be 10 hours, but you can't meaningfully do it unless you spend 20 or 30 hours, and then students switch off and stop learning. So I think there's sometimes too much focus on quantity and not enough on quality and meaningful engagement. But I'd be curious what you guys, the rest of the panel, thinks about those ideas.
Yeah, if I can comment on that, I think that's really valid. Often we don't look at the levels of expertise that we're trying to achieve through a particular interaction. There's a scale of expertise. I think it's Dreyfus and Dreyfus were the researchers who came out and said expertise can be at a novice level, advanced beginner, competent, proficient, or expert. And there are other scales as well. But if we start thinking, each individual student will reach a different level of expertise. Now, advanced beginner is a level of expertise. But are we thinking that that's where we want to take students to? And if we're not really consciously aware of, in the array of students that we have with different backgrounds, different prior knowledge, where do we want to take them to? I think that question of really thinking about the time to the level of mastery that we are hoping to get students to is a very important question.
I think that's also something to build into, I keep saying standards, but guidelines, whatever you kind of want to call them, that looks at a few things. It looks at, on the one hand, just the total amount of like, let's call it content that is there, or amount of time that would be required, as Rita was saying, to do everything. But then on the other hand, what are the different kinds of engagement? So if it literally is just content, then we're talking essentially about receptive engagement. Or is it something that's more productive? Is it utilising a forum? To what extent is that social? So are there different kinds of engagement? And then just finally, are those things labelled as, as this is core, these are optional, choose some? They're really quite, in some ways, basic solutions that can push us past the problem that you're talking about. But I agree, it's an omniscient kind of problem, like it's everywhere.
Thanks. Any further questions? Yeah, Andrew.
Hi, we've actually got one from our YouTube channel. And I'll add a little bit to it. So it's from Caitlin, bear with me. And it asks, which LMS do you think will outlive the rest? Or, I'd like to add to it, will the LMS be our solution moving forward?
Arms race question. This is great.
Excited. No, I think look, Moodle and Canvas are both going really well at the moment, but I don't think an LMS is the solution. I think there is something else. It could be an exostructure. It could be something completely different that then takes over in terms of a sustainability approach, because what I'm seeing quite clearly now is that, at the moment we're collecting learner analytics, but if you move forward, we should be doing predictive analytics now. And that would sort of alleviate some of the mastery levels discussion around it, because, the analytics are collecting what a student is going through, and then it predicts, okay, you're at this level, you've got 100%, maybe you should try something a bit more difficult. We've got the AI there, we've got the data there that can sort of do that. And so I don't think, I think there's a separate platform out there that will replace that, but it will take into account the whole student and not just the student present within the LMS, because I think that students nowadays do a lot of things outside of an LMS, because let's face it, the LMS doesn't meet a lot of the social media needs. It's not supposed to, but then hands up who's studied recently? Yeah, who's used WhatsApp to communicate with their group members? You use WhatsApp, Line, WeChat, you use your Microsoft products, Teams. That's not connected to an LMS, but you can do so much with it, and all your Google products as well. There needs to be something else that ties it all together and presents a complete picture, whereas I think the LMS only presents a part of it and only the online interaction.
That's right. If I can just add a point to that, I think one of the key points of sustainability will be the way in which the LMS lightens the teacher's workload. We've been dealing with this issue for a long time and trying to find ways. As we know, training.gov.au didn't really set up their system in a good way to import into LMSs. If someone could take that whole body of knowledge and just put it into a database so that, at the click of a button, you could import a whole training package into an LMS, these are the kind of things that would stop teachers from having to copy and paste units of competency, elements, performance criteria, and whatever else. And I think with the casualization of the workforce, we often hear, people say, why should I turn up at that meeting? I'm not being paid for it. And with, I believe, about 40% of the higher education workforce casualized in some areas, we've got to find a way to lighten that administrative load. A teacher should be able to teach at least 80 to 90% of the time. The time spent on copying and pasting should be spent face-to-face with students. How is that going to be achievable? And I think that is one of the big issues that will make the LMS that comes out in front in the next few years. I think that'll be something that it really deals with well. We don't know what it is yet. It might be Moodle, it might be Canvas.
Yeah, but I sort of disagree, because I don't think we should be forcing an LMS to do something that it's not supposed to do. That's when we start coming up with coding solutions and programs and things like that, which then add to the maintenance load by IT people. I think we should be sort of thinking outside of the LMS and have a sustainable solution which you can update it, it can do, automate the administrative tasks. I just don't believe that it should be done in the LMS. It should be connected to the LMS. It should facilitate that process. And also, I think it's really important that just because something is in the LMS and you're teaching in there doesn't actually reduce the teaching load. In some aspects, when I've been teaching online, it actually increases, because you've got a lot more expectations to be connected instantaneously. So I think, moving forward, in order for technology and the teaching staff to be sustainable, it is quite important to recognise that there is a significant load related to teaching online, and it's equal to face-to-face, if not more.
I've got a quick question about the exostructure that you have. Is it a product or is it a workflow?
The exostructure is actually a product. It's a system that it's sort of like a spool, and then it connects all the different disparate systems together. But there is another name for it out there as well, and a lot of the universities now in the US are using that as opposed to using the LMS. Yeah.
Because our team has to build across a variety of environments.
Yeah.
So being able to build somewhere agnostic first would certainly give flexibility depending on where it was going to end up.
I think so. Because, I mean, when I worked at a university, we had Canvas, Blackboard and Moodle present at the same time. Don't laugh. I was like, really? Okay, I can help. No, not really. But it is moving towards a more system-agnostic solution. And it's probably more responsive. And I just think that, to be able to trial a whole lot of things, to be able to move things across learning management systems, because yes, now we're having Canvas now and it's going to work for the next 2 years, 3 years, but then it's going to come to a point where the institute or higher powers that be would say, look, I think it's not working for us, we want to move, and there might be legitimate reasons, and then once again there's another shift. I mean, that's the world that we're living in, and it's best to have a system agnostic approach than to tie it to a system.
And the technology shouldn't guide the learning design, so that would be very helpful.
There we go. A couple of points on that question, because it is a big one. One of them is the question, is the LMS going to die? Well, firstly, maybe that's not totally answerable, but we do know that learners are using multiple systems, and we're sending them there. It's not just the ones that they're doing of their own volition. So that's when we need to think about things like data standards, openness, is it open source, can it share data, what happens if we change to another product, can we take the data that we've already got in this old product and use it in the new one, how easy is that, how much will they help us with that? It's only one, but as I mentioned at Navitas, we use XAPI, which means that, for example, if a learner is in Moodle, then obviously we can track them, no big deal, but that goes into our learner record store. If they go off to Zoom, we can track them there, and we can track them in other systems as well. So that you don't if you're looking at your early warning systems or whatever other ways you want to track learners, you can track them across multiple systems. No, you go.
Yeah, no, on the point of the learning record store, I think it's becoming increasingly important as the casualisation of workforce, and what Eastern Health Hospital have been doing is that they have a learning record store to connect to multiple learning management systems, so that when a nurse moves from one hospital to the next, they're able to track that they've done the OH&S, and they don't have to keep on repeating it, and they don't have to continually pay the nurses for that. So I think, that is actually quite important as a system in terms of sustainability, in terms of facilitating students moving around. I mean, you might have a student that come and do a TAFE course, then goes out, and you might provide them with professional development, and then you might want to connect with this organisation that they have with a relationship with and say, look, we can help expedite your onboarding process by offering this as well.
And also maybe just a little bit of a view on whether or not, is the LMS going to die or whatever. I think that the issue at the moment with LMSs is that when you go into them as a student or a teacher, they are still focused on content. That's the kind of organising structure behind them. I'm not saying that content is an inherently bad thing, but if we want to keep our approach to learning there, then I think the LMS makes sense. But if you look at, for example, the work that you can do in the Microsoft suite, which I was quite surprised by recently discovering what different colleges across Australia are doing with the combination of Teams, OneNote, having project groups collaboratively working on Word documents. I know we've had it in Google for a while, But I guess with the addition of Teams, you've got the chat features as well. They're all a lot stronger for that kind of collaborative, constructive work that can be done in class with a lecturer, can be done between students, than our learning management systems are. So I think learning management systems would need to up their game in that area if they're not going to get cannibalised to some extent by, I think, Office.
And if I can just add to that, there's, if we look at the full workflow, from content through to the learning experience, through to the evaluation of the learning experience, through to the compliance of the training, we're looking at quite a complex workflow. And obviously, I think those kind of innovations that Rita's spoken about are fantastic. And I think the problem we have to deal with in the VE sector is this: we've always got this kind of person in the black cloak with the auditor's hat in the background, looking over our shoulders, and are we going to be issued a 21-day improvement letter or pass the audit? And so while we need to move into this really sort of disruptive and innovative space in terms of learning delivery and enabling learners to be as flexible as possible, underneath it all is this compliance level that has to be worked, and that area has to be simplified in some way, where the 5,000 RTOs in Australia have to, it just seems absurd that you've got all of these organizations replicating the same process over and over again, just tens and hundreds of thousands of hours being whittled away by people copying and pasting performance criteria and so on. That particular problem could probably alleviate 30% of the workload of teachers if that was automated, whether it's done through a system such as an LMS or another system. I think that remains to be seen, whether that will be solved, how that will be solved. But it certainly is one that's at the forefront of the VE sector at the moment.
We might take one more question because we're sort of running short. Nikki, thank you.
How can we avoid creating a digital divide? So students that, say, can't afford the new technologies that we're sort of rolling out, or, there's a generation of people that didn't grow up with these technologies and it's moving pretty quickly. So what sort of steps can we take to kind of avoid leaving these people behind?
Back to paper.
I think there isn't just one approach. I think it's a community approach. You've got your libraries, you've got your centres of excellence, and when I'm studying my MBA, one of these, you can do a Blue Horizon type of strategy paper, and one of the things that I thought, it's not the solution, was that you've got all these post offices around. Wouldn't it be nice if you changed them into innovation centres or places where people can access technology, because you've got all this real estate that people don't really use. I think it's a broader conversation around it. I think definitely opening up, library centres, universities, because I look at the school that my daughter goes to, and they're playing with most primary school nowadays, robots, iPads, they're your standard. And I do question how someone without an iPad can keep up with the homework that is sent home every night, where you've got your reading aids, your mathematics, and everything else that they are required to do.
I think Apple has really set a good precedent in creating spaces for people to come and play and just test things out, and really have a soft entry point for people where they're in a safe environment, you have support around them. I can give two examples where this has and hasn't worked. My mother is 83 and a complete technophobe. Just looking at an iPhone just sends her into stress. My mother-in-law is completely proficient on her iPad. She's 85, nearly 85 now, She's been learning for about 3 years, but her mindset has been to learn it. It means communication with her family in different parts of the world, and she's just embraced it. And I think the core question is not so much at a technical level, but giving people a reason and saying, well, this is actually a communication tool. This 20 years ago was the telephone. How can we help people to understand what that technology can do to serve their purposes? I think there is some work to be done, but certainly, walking into an Apple Center, I just still love that experience. Just going to try out new software, having someone walk over to you and say, have you tried this, have you tried that? And just a completely safe place for experimenting. That's one idea.
Two thoughts. One of them not as positive as the other. The question of the have and have-nots problem is a societal one. I think there are things that we can do around helping those that can't to get access to technology, but it is a societal problem, so it's really very difficult. In terms of the gap between I have used this before versus, or I understand how to use this and I don't understand how to use this, I'm a little bit scared of this. I think that does come, some extent anyway, down to good design. If you think about the kinds of tools, technology tools that people who might not normally engage with technology might already be using. For example, banking. Not that I don't like to look at banking and say, oh, we should be doing that. I think there's a bit too much of that in EdTech. But nevertheless, just in terms of the simplicity and ability to do previously complex tasks in banking or in messaging that you would see, for example, older people using or people who've had less familiarity with technology using, it does come back to actually quite good design. So I think that there is some work to do there in terms of the design can actually help that problem. But I wouldn't say that it solves it.
I'm going to take a liberty. I think there's a comment to be made that there is a lot of opposition to the NBN in this country, but everyone wants Netflix. So it's
NBN
really
should be cheaper. That'd help.
It should be cheaper. It should be faster. It should have been 10 years ago. But it's a lot of. I think it's about the messaging as well. Like this will help you get to there. So sometimes there's certainly cost, but that cost can be shared across the community if the community's on board. Yeah. Yeah. Please.
Perhaps, is there some responsibility for the universities to, have, I guess they do. Never mind.
Thank you. So we're sort of a little bit out of time. Could you give a big round of applause, not into your microphones? Thanks, excellent panellists, David, Rita and Ashley. Oh, Lindsay, sorry. And no one goes away empty-handed, so I think we've got some helpers in the audience who've brought some things. There were some helpers. Oh, next to me. Couple of items here just in time for lunch. And before you get up and go, we've got a blog and we report all these things. There'll be a stream up so you can watch this, you can listen to yourself. If you ask questions, thank you. And we do this every 2 months, so come along to the next one. Thank you very much.
Please stay in contact. I would love to hear from you and keep the conversation going.